Okay, today's lecture, Chapter 12, the World War I era, Section 5, Global Peacemaker. So for today's lecture, make sure you have your student notes, you're answering those guided questions. Answer the lecture questions on the Google form. Those are due by midnight tonight. Today's objectives: what expectations did Wilson and the Allies bring to the peace conference? What were the important provisions of the peace treaty? And how did the federal government and ordinary Americans react to the end of war? Okay, so we're going to start out with President Wilson. President Wilson was an idealistic president. He was a progressive president, as we discussed in earlier lectures. He was a college professor who studied history and politics. He then became president of Princeton University and governor of New Jersey. So he decided as president that he was going to use the war as a way to move the world forward. And again, in a very idealistic way. So what we're going to see Wilson do, and this is in January of 1918, so a little bit into the United States, and after we entered the war. Remember, we entered the war in April of 1917. So by January 1918, Wilson gives this speech, and where he outlines his 14 points, and he gives this to the American Congress. And of course, at this point in time with technology, this is spread around the world quite quickly. And Wilson's 14 points becomes the basis for this peace program. And this peace initiative. The Americans assumed this would be the peace, or not the peace treaty itself, but at least the basis for it. Many Europeans saw the same way, and Germany saw this as the basis for the peace plan. And this was one of the reasons that we ended up with the armistice in 1918. And before we get too much into how the peace plan actually worked, let's go ahead and take a look at Wilson's 14 points. And it's important to understand sort of what was the goal of the 14 points, right? We have to understand that in order to have a war as deadly as World War I was, and as we discussed in previous lectures, huge losses of life around the world. So in order for this to have been worth it, we really must decide that we really can't do this anymore. And so Wilson began saying these phrases like, we have to make the world safe for democracy. Right. And so part of the peace plan is we need to make the world safe for democracy. World War I was often called the war to end all wars. And people really believed this at the time, that this was going to be the last war. And so therefore, the peace plan needs to make it needs to be so we won't have any future wars. Well, one way to address it, we won't have any future wars, is we have to look at what sort of caused this war. And again, if you can remember the main causes of World War I, again, discussed previously, we're going to refer back to some of these when we look at Wilson's 14 points. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. We're not going to go through all 14. We're going to hit the big ones. And so we'll just start these off here. So again, no more secret agreements, right? If you guys remember, the A in the main causes of war were these alliances, right? And these alliances, these secret alliances, often led to war. So Wilson decided, look, if you're going to have a treaty with another country, everybody needs to know about this one, right? So we see the A in our main causes, right? Free navigation of the seas. Now, this is clearly a dig at sort of the U-boats and sort of how the U-boats drew the United States into war, and maybe a not so subtle sort of jab at the British for blockading German ports. But either way, this was one of the causes or one of the ways that that came into the war. So Wilson wanted to address that. We want to end all economic barriers. In other words, mercantilism, which you would remember from your world history class. Uh, but this is basically dealing with this idea of imperialism. Remember, Germany wanted colonies. And of course, all the good colonies were taken, so they had to take them from other Europeans. Well, remember, one of the benefits of a colony is that colony has to trade with you, and they can't trade with somebody else. That's mercantilism. And Wilson is saying, no, we need to get rid of these economic barriers. You want your colony, fine, but they should be able to trade with whomever they want. So again, we're addressing alliances and we're addressing imperialism. The next one here, countries just need to reduce the number of weapons they had. Again, we see here kind of eyeing at our militarism from that previous lecture. But yeah, I remember countries during industrialization, they built their arms up, they built their weapons, and then decided to use them. So let's just decrease the number of weapons countries have, and that can solve this problem as well. Besides, if we're not going to have wars, we really don't need the weapons anyway. Belgium should be independent like before the war. So if you remember, Belgium was punched through, Germany punched through Belgium on the way to France. So again, this is sort of your nationalism. So again, we already have the main causes right there, and we have a few more of these to go. France should be fully liberated. Remember, German soldiers were still on French soil at this point. And France should be allowed to recover the Alsace-Lorraine. So again, this is a little bit of nationalism here. The Alsace-Lorraine, you want to pay attention to. This is the most fought over chunk of real estate probably in Western Europe anyway, between Germany and France. They've been literally fighting over this. Charlemagne's sons in the 800s were fighting over this territory. So World War I is going to be about it. World War II, this is going to come back and play a part. So this is this chunk of land right in between France and Germany. Both sides claim it, and it's going to be a big problem here. Uh, anyway, so even with just these six, and again, we're going to go through a few more of these, we see Wilson addressing, again, a lot of these problems, sort of what got us into war in the first place, and then let's try to address that so we don't go into war again. It's logical, makes sense. Let's continue on with Wilson's here. So we have a few more, and probably the most important one that we want to look at, and again, this is one of your one of your vocabulary words. We're actually going to get at it here in a second. So self-determination, right? And self-determination is just the power to make decisions about your own future, right? Self-determination was often assigned to ethnicity, right? Ethnicity. So again, this kind of jumps into our nationalism idea. So people like Italians, all the different people in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which weren't just Austrians and Hungarians, there were a multitude of ethnic groups. The Balkan states, that part of southeastern Europe, right there where Sarajevo and Serbia, the Turkish people. So the old Ottoman Empire is going to be fragmented, where the ethnic Turks, probably the largest ethnic group, certainly within the political hierarchy of the Ottomans. But then again, within the Ottoman Empire, there were a lot of non-Turks, right? And they should be allowed some kind of self-determination as well. Again, if they want to maintain part of the Ottoman Empire or part of this new Turkish Empire, fantastic. But if they want independence, they should certainly be allowed to do that. An independent Poland. So again, this is more kind of nationalism. Now, again, flashing back to your world history, about 70 years before this, Poland was gobbled up and it disappeared for a time. Germany had a chunk, Austria-Hungary had a chunk, and Russia had a chunk. Well, now we're going to bring Poland back, right? And at least to Wilson, at least the one he felt was vitally important, was this League of Nations. Excuse me. So, and this League of Nations is just going to be set up to guarantee political and territorial independence of all member states. Just a place where all countries can get together to solve their problems. We shouldn't have to go back into a big giant war to do this. Right? If we have problems, let's go and find a place where we can do this. Right? Okay, we're going to start here. Lecture question number 1. How many parts were in Wilson's peace plan? Number 1, how many parts were in Wilson's peace plan? Okay, so these are Wilson's plans, right? This is the 14 points. He makes the speech in January, and now in November 1918, we have the ceasefire, and we are going to go and now you do the hard part, right? The ceasefire, but now you have to make a treaty. Now you have to end the war in a kind of formal way. And so Wilson is actually going to travel to Paris to be part of the peace plan or part of the peace negotiations himself. He is the first sitting U.S. president to leave the American shore. And he is going to bring with him no Republicans, which will come to have some problems for him in a later point. But there's an old tradition in the United States that politics ends at the water's edge, meaning within our United States we can argue Democrat, Republicans, we can fight back and forth. But when it comes to foreign policy and when we deal with other countries, we need to be united. Right? And Wilson did not bring Republicans with him. Wilson, of course, being a Democrat, and Republicans were in control of the Senate, so that this was probably a weakness on his part. And we'll see, will come to cause him some problems later on. Okay, so Wilson's 14 points. Wilson is off to Paris. Okay, so when Wilson gets to Paris, he realizes that he's just going to have to compromise. So first of all, there's the big 4 countries, right, that are at the peace treaty. There's a lot of countries there, but there's really the big 4: England, France, Italy, and the United States. Now, Wilson, of course, had said very early on that he or the United States wanted no spoils of war. Right, and so for spoils of war, all that means is just rewards gained through military victory. So if my army invades your country and we defeat your army, we're going to take your stuff. That's the spoils of war, and this is an ancient tradition going back to who knows when, probably the first wars. But anyway, so Wilson had said early on, we don't want any spoils. We don't need any of this stuff. And he really encouraged the other allies to do this as well. He says, look, we need to make a fair peace, right? And this, of course, is not necessarily how the others saw it. England and France, especially, but Italy to a lesser extent, they really blamed Germany, and they wanted Germany to pay for the war damages. They wanted Germany and the Central Powers to pay for the millions of lives lost. They wanted them to pay economically, but in other ways as well. So Wilson is forced to compromise on this bit. He originally wanted no spoils. Eventually, he's just going to acknowledge that the United States isn't going to take any spoils. Wilson is also then forced to compromise again on his self-determination idea, at least for the former German colonies. England and France are going to want these colonies. Now, of course, Wilson had hoped that these colonies would get to decide for themselves, these colonies in Africa, in China, in islands in the Pacific. He was hoping for them to like I said, be able to determine their own future. That would not be the case. England and France would gobble them up. The only big player that's not here is Russia. But if you guys remember from a previous lecture, Russia had lost. Russia had already signed a treaty with Germany, giving them huge chunks of land that was under Vladimir Lenin, and Lenin is in Russia, kind of doing his own thing with the Russian Revolution and trying to redo a communist revolution there. So so Wilson, his idealistic plan, his goal for peace, his goal for, no future wars, this is not really working out for him, and he's forced to compromise again and again. Um, the only thing Wilson would not compromise on really was this League of Nations. The League of Nations, like I said before, it was just this international organization, and it was designed a place where countries could come together, right, to ensure peace and security. Wilson, there's a great quote from him. I mean, this is long before the peace conference. This was after the United States got into war, right around the time where he had proposed his 14 points. But he said, "Look, there must not be a balance of power, but a community of power, not organized rivalries, but an organized common peace." He didn't like the allied system, this mutual defense idea where we ended up with two different camps. You had the allies and you had the Central Powers. That's not the way he saw this. That's not what we need. Again, so again, we don't need a balance of power, but a community of peace. And the uh, League of Nations was definitely part of, or I would even say the heart of, his 14 points. Okay, quick lecture question number 2. Who did England and France want to pay for the war? Right? Who did England and France believe should pay for the war? Okay, so the League of Nations, Wilson's plan, that will make it into the peace treaty. However, back home, this became a little problematic within the United States. Republicans in Congress, remember, these guys are quite powerful in the Senate. They became really concerned with Article 10 of the League's charter. Don't worry about the other articles for this class. Just make sure you understand about this Article 10. And what Article 10 said was that basically, um, if one country declared war on the other countries, right, or if one country declared war on any one of the other countries, all the other countries would have to come in, right, and have to defend that country. So imagine in Europe again, let's backtrack, and if Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and all these people were part of the League of Nations, every country would have to go in and defend Serbia and fight Austria-Hungary. And the United States just was looking at this, and especially Republicans in the Senate were looking at this and saying, this is not necessarily what we want. We may not want to be drawn into another war. So very quickly, Wilson's 14 points are coming into some problems. They're coming into problems in Europe. They're coming into problems in Paris at the peace negotiations themselves, and they're coming into problems here at home in the United States. Okay, so let's take a look at the peace treaty itself. So one of the things it does is it completely redraws the map of Eastern Europe here. And this treaty is called the Treaty of Versailles. I just called it the Peace Treaty, but the Treaty of Versailles. 9 new nations are going to be created, and you can see them there in the light green. For a couple of different reasons here. The goal is to weaken Germany. Right, the purple part, that's that Alsace-Lorraine we talked about, where it's technically going to be kind of Germany, but France is going to help administer it. It's going to be a demilitarized zone. And there's going to be some other rules with that. But Germany's going to be made weaker. They're going to carve chunks out of Germany. There's going to be a lot of ethnic Germans outside of Germany itself. So, for example, kind of right here in this sort of western part of Czechoslovakia. And if you look here, there's kind of like a Germany here and a Germany here. Poland, they wanted to make sure it had access to the sea. So they carved, so this little whole chunk of Germany here, it's mostly Germans. There's a few Poles in there, of course, but that will be again made as a design to, in this case, strengthen Poland, but also weaken Germany. The Ottoman Empire, which we haven't talked a ton about, they are going to be completely fragmented. As I talked about before, the Turks being the dominant ethnic group in the Ottoman Empire. They will we'll see the modern creation of the nation of Turkey, but the rest of the Ottoman Empire will be fragmented up and broken up to and awarded to the British and the French. So the big losers, certainly territorial wise, Austria-Hungary completely fragmented, the Ottoman Empire shattered, and even Germany itself is going to have big chunks taken out of it. Okay, lecture question number 3. How many new countries were created by the peace treaty? How many new countries were created by the Treaty of Versailles? Okay, so let's take a look at just the map here. So this is the map before the war, and so you can really see dominant sort of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria. We didn't talk a bunch about them, but they were part of it, and again Turkey or the Ottoman Empire. But this is going to be Germany after the war, and so you can really kind of see the fragmentation in Eastern Europe, all those new countries. You're going to see Germany quite a bit smaller. I'm going to bounce back and forth again. So I really want you to focus on the Germany here. So, so you see Germany just completely gutted to the east, a little bit to the south. And again, that demilitarized zone over there in the west as well. Let me see here. Okay. So now let's go ahead and take a look here at the peace treaty too. Remember, I already talked about the goal here is to punish Germany, humiliate Germany, and financially cripple Germany. Right? Remember, that is certainly a goal here. Germany is going to be required to pay billions of dollars, specifically $33 billion. They're going to have to pay to the Allies for the war here. These are just one of your vocab terms here. It's called reparations, payment or economic injury suffered during war. And the argument here is, look, Germany started the war. We've blown up huge chunks of France, and not to mention the millions of lives lost. And so Germany is going to have to pay for this. And of course, Wilson, as I mentioned earlier, vehemently opposed this part of the plan. He thought it was a disaster. He felt that this would just lead to animosity with Germany. It would make them angry, and it's just going to lead to future wars. And in this case, he was exactly right. World War II is going to be fought some 20 years later. All the same countries fighting over all the same territory, over pretty much all the same issues. The war to end all war did anything but. Right? Germany is going to be forced to sign this treaty. The peace negotiations were not negotiations in a way you may think. These were negotiations among the Allies. Remember, I already said Russia wasn't there. They weren't allowed in. Germany wasn't even allowed in. Right? When the treaty was done, when the Allies agreed what the treaty was going to be, Germany was forced to come in. They brought in the German ambassador on a railroad car. He never even got to leave the railroad car. They brought the treaty to him. He signed it, and then they swooshed him off, and he went back to Germany. So this treaty will do the utmost to completely punish Germany, to completely humiliate Germany, and will unfortunately do exactly what Wilson feared, and like I said, sow the seeds for war. Lecture question number 4. How much money did Germany have to pay to the Allies? Question number 4. How much money did Germany have to pay to the Allies? Okay, so the treaty is signed. Wilson comes back home. And as I mentioned before, Article 10 is the problem. Now, constitutionally speaking, uh, the Senate needs to ratify a treaty, right? The president or the secretary of state, they can sign a treaty, that's fine, but it's not official until the Senate ratifies it. It takes 2/3 vote in the Senate. Now, when Wilson comes home, there was great acclaim at first. The public loved it. Yay, we have this treaty. Really, everyone was really kind of glad about the war being over. But once that died down, and Republicans, probably a little bitter at not being invited to Paris to take part in the plan. But if Wilson was smart, he could have brought them with him, and his concerns could have been addressed there. But they were not, and so there were a group of senators called the Irreconcilables. And basically, they could not reconcile themselves to agree to this treaty. And the treaty failed in the United States Senate. It wasn't going to get the votes. And so basically, Wilson is then pushing for another vote. He's trying to get the public behind them. So what Wilson's going to do, Wilson is going to campaign for the treaty itself. He tours the country by train, travels all over the country, 23 days straight, giving multiple speeches a day, how we need to support this treaty, and really kind of this whirlwind tour. And it was during the end of this when Wilson had a very devastating stroke. Left him paralyzed on the left side of his body. He had to stop campaigning. And there's a bit of concern about, is Wilson going to survive, et cetera, et cetera. He does survive, and but he just became more intractable. People said to him and said, "Look, let's just compromise with the Republicans. Let's get this treaty signed." And Wilson would not flex. He would not compromise. And so, in November 1919, the Senate failed to ratify the treaty. The United States declared the war officially over in May 1920, and basically it would ratify separate peace treaties with Germany, Austria, and Hungary. And very importantly, the United States did not join the League of Nations. We would just not do that. Okay, lecture question number 5. What article of the League of Nations did the Republicans oppose? Lecture question number 5. What article of the League of Nations did the Republicans oppose? Okay. Post-war adjustments. Okay, so during the war, if you guys remember, we talked quite a bit, the economy really ramped up. And it had given a boost. There were a lot of jobs. We talked about women working into the workforce, minorities moving up into the workforce. The United States had become the world's largest creditor nation. It was estimated that European countries owed the United States $11.5 billion, which is great for the economy. But the problem is when soldiers are returning home, which, by the way, they're returning home, was about 4,000 soldiers a day. Coming home, and there's no jobs. All those factories that were making war goods are not making war goods anymore. Contracts get canceled, so factories have to shut down and retool to make something else, toasters or whatever. So there's an awful lot of unemployment. Um, Farmers are going to be in trouble because, of course, Europe was blown to bits. And so, therefore, during the war, they couldn't really grow their own food or make their own stuff. Well, now that the war's over, they can get back to that. And so, there's going to be a tough economic change here. African American soldiers, despite their service to the country, returned home to find discrimination. Sad parts of American history where we, today tend to fall all over ourselves to honor veterans. Um, in this case, we would do really the exact opposite, and it's amazingly sad. And so, a lot of Americans entered these post-war years with this sense of gloom, this war to end all wars, and we're going to solve this problem, and very quickly we just began to realize that that is not what was happening. Um, Alice Lord O'Brien was a military post exchange director um, from Buffalo, New York, decorated by the French a couple of times for military uh, behavior. Just expressed the views of a lot of many. Writing a letter home, said, "We all started out with high ideals. After being right up here, almost at the front line, I cannot understand what it was all about or what had been accomplished by all this waste of youth." And that's really going to be the sad part of this period is, at least in the United States, but I think even in many European nations, there was the goal that World War One was, while devastating, was maybe going to be worth it. And within just a couple of years, many had decided that it probably was not worth it. And I think history certainly shown that, as I've already mentioned, like with the failure of Versailles. Wrong direction. Okay, so the objectives for this lecture here: what expectations did Wilson and the Allies bring to the peace conference? What were the important provisions of the peace treaty? How did the federal government and ordinary Americans react to the end of the war? That concludes today's lecture.